Good evening. My name is Michael Hawryschuk. I am an anesthesiologist at UC, and it's a pleasure today to be sitting down and speaking about um, my personal faith journey. And now I'm just trying to find the screen share. Okay. As I've known Dr. Farrow for a number of years, he asked me to come and talk about my personal faith journey. So as a quick introduction, as I mentioned, I'm an anesthesiologist currently at UC. I completed my medical school at SUNY Buffalo in Buffalo, New York, graduating in 2010. From there, I relocated to Cincinnati to do my residency. Dr. Farrow was one of my mentors and faculty instructors, and I've learned a lot from him over the years and continue to interface. I currently work as Associate Residency Program Director, and recently become the Director of our UC Anesthesiology Global Health Resident Education Program. As I've been involved with Belize since 2012, and have grown that program to involve our residents in that experience. I mostly do adult anesthesia, particularly liver transplant anesthesia, as well as work on the regional anesthesia team. And I am the soon-to-be president of the Ohio Society of Anesthesiologists. Next slide. So in talking about my faith journey, I thought of it in different phases, if you will, because I didn't know if seasons would be enough to explain how many phases would really explain what I've gone through. And I have to warn, I've told this story in various forms over the years in front of our church on the faith side, and I often have a hard time getting through it because it was so impactful for me. So bear with me if that should occur. First off, I was baptized and attended a Eastern Rite Catholic church, and really enjoyed going because I worked as an altar boy and was really engaged and involved in the actual service itself. So if by nothing else, I just enjoyed having something to do during the course of Mass rather than sit there and passively receive it. One of the big things that first I felt guilty about, and now that I see her point on the right of the screen, that's my grandma. She's now deceased, but she had such a strong Catholic faith, and this is due to her being able to escape World War II, and she has long stories about how faith guided her. She was taken away from her family. Her family was just sent to Siberia and never saw him again. And she was on multiple forced labor camps for the Nazis. So she experienced all the different bombings, and whether her city was invaded by the Russians or the Nazis, there was always fears of her dying and her friends, and she's seen many die. So I looked at her as somebody I would really want to be. But as I got older, going through the high school years, teenage years, I just started to go through the motions. I was actually more excited when we were not able to attend church than when we had to go, and I saw it just kind of that, just something to get through. But I didn't really feel that the church or God's words were really meaningful or impactful to me. So when I entered college, undergraduate, I thought as a more mature adult thinker that maybe I'll give this religion thing a whole nother chance. Ended up finding a Roman Catholic church at the college, and it really started to connect. The priest was young. I got to know him, became more involved in the church itself. But at the same time, Pastor Mikhail headed home for New Year's Eve to spend it with his mother. In the process, he got either fell asleep at the wheel and ended up getting into an accident where he was decapitated by a guardrail. So obviously that got me thinking, why would God take one of his closest followers? And I said, I don't want to have anything to do with this religion thing. Why would the ultimate be-all, end-all take one of his, I guess, earthly teachers? So for the remainder of college, again, I stepped away from religion, says, I don't believe in that stuff, don't believe in God. Um, Not until medical school did I start kind of searching around and kind of church shopping is I guess the popular way to say it. I went to Presbyterian, Lutheran, uh, different Catholics, different Catholic churches, non-denominational, but never really kind of connected anywhere. So again, there were still words to me and not much more. Um, when I moved to Cincinnati, I ended up finding Horizon Community Church close to or just after my graduation from residency. Was the first time really after all the church shopping in Cincinnati that the pastor's words really meant anything to me. Certainly it wasn't very formal in its teachings, but a way to decipher, words and make it applicable to our own lives. Um, so I keep talking about Horizon Community Church. I found it just after I graduated. And my first bullet point, is this a sign? So as a senior anesthesia resident, one of our professors was talking about her involvement and her husband's involvement through her works at the ASA in Tanzania and Nigeria. I was so moved by her presentation, I approached her at the end and says, I want to do this, I want to go. So these trips happen to be a month long, and like I said, Nigeria, Tanzania. So I relayed to my wife that here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna go to Africa. I'm gonna teach African anesthesia providers how to do this. I'll be there for a month. And my wife just cut me off at that moment saying, not right now. Not with a 4-year-old son. She said, when I said you should be involved with mission work, it's after you if you're worth something, is the way she put it, half joking. So I certainly gave up on that plan. But the funny thing is that the church pamphlet, she read it, picked it up, and handed it off to me, and it was looking for specifically anesthesiologists to be involved with this trip to Belize. So I said, whoa, it's our first time attending here. Is this a sign? So this mission trip I've been involved with started in 2004. And it actually started by Jay Logeman as part of Horizon Community Church. He's been involved the whole time. It's a seven-day trip. And during that time, it is a faith-based trip. It is well organized by Pastor John Kirby. And so it's more than just providing medical care. So it's 7 days you're there. We have a construction team, a medical team, and then a surgical team, which started in 2007 by Surgeon Devinder Maggett. But nonetheless, it was an opportunity to finally realize doing works for others in the name of God, and certainly a more realistic time level of 7 days versus a month. So when I first spoke to Pastor Kirby and he brought me into the meeting for people interested or have been to Belize, what we're supposed to do is go around, introduce ourselves, what team we're going to be on, what we're going to be doing, and any kind of, pertinent information. And for people who've been on this trip multiple times previously, they were asked to speak of their God moment. So what is God moment? It sounds kind of hokey just by, the way it was explained. So when it comes my turn to introduce myself, Dr. Hawryschuk, anesthesia, but I want to be on the construction team. And Pastor Kirby kind of laughed at me, said, no, we need you for other reasons and your other skill set. And I stopped him for a minute and I say, I'm glad everybody sounds very excited about their time on this trip. But excuse me if I can't get as excited. I said, I'm newly graduated. And, if I go on as a construction team, if I hurt somebody, it's just me. But if I go and, as a new anesthesiologist working in a third world country with limited medications and supplies, and unknown, I've never had boots on the ground, never been out of the country. I was like, if I have a bad day there, there's a high likelihood somebody dies. So that was really kind of a stumbling block for me. And, Pastor Kirby says, well, just pray on it. And, I hope that you take that leap of faith. So I went, and I call it year one. And actually, Ann Coster was an anesthesiologist on the trip with me. So I'm thankful that she was there as for year one. Certainly I was very wound up, very anxious for all the reasons listed above. but I said, I've been a performer all my life. I should be able to handle this. So I found myself trusting myself over God. What I know is what, this trip needs. And I was anxious the whole time. Um, but I did have pride in my past accomplishments. And I really found it, look what I've done. And that's kind of what I took away from the trip. Um, so in getting to know some of the people who were on that trip, I mean, certainly they were imperfect people, as was I, not necessarily what you would consider very spiritual people. We had spent a lot of time at the bar next door to the hotel, and you start hearing about what other people are going through. So the takeaway was, at best, this is a lot of imperfect people coming together to do work in God's name. No God moment, but that's, for the next slide. So phase 3, if you will, I consider my God moment. And that would be all these people in this picture are the same person. And so my God moment involved Gilberto Chi is his name. And that's his mom, Alejandra. So probably a lot of speaking without a lot of words on this slide, but by and far, this picture in the upper left corner was my second year in Belize. The other anesthesiologist with me, she hadn't been around anesthesia for a number of years and was more there for the social aspect, leaving me to be essentially the guy. So that was anxiety provoking enough. I brought 2 residents with me, very capable residents. So this picture up left corner was Gilberto the first time I met him. He's about 18 months old here. And just looking at him, I said, what's going on here? He's here for a cleft palate surgery. I asked Mom, any medical problems? No medical problems. Very high energy kid. Only thing he really had was scoliosis. So when you look at him, you don't look there and say, this kid who's very small in stature, not really verbal, and does not look like a high energy kid. So my resident also picked up on this. So we discussed it later that night, saying, well, let's Google search. Let's see if we can find anything just based on, what we heard from our preoperative visit that could be important in treating this kid. Couldn't find anything. So the day when he arrived for surgery, we did the standard induction. There you put the face mask on, they breathe in the anesthesia. As they drift off to sleep, you put an IV in to give additional anesthesia. So we did that. I pushed the anesthetic and we waited. This was not the resident who saw this patient in pre-op, it was the other one. So I didn't want to give the patient a paralytic because he was small and I didn't have a whole lot of that medication. And deep enough anesthesia, you shouldn't need it. So he says that when we go to place the breathing tube, that he can't open the kid's mouth because he has muscle rigidity in his face. So I was like, okay, I'll deepen the anesthetic. So I pushed more medication. I removed the sheet that was placed over him just to make sure the IV was working. What I found there was that in addition to having masseter spasm, he had full flexion of his upper extremities, full extension of his lower extremities, was rigid as a board, such to the point where his back was arching off the table. I knew it could probably be bad the first time when my resident couldn't open his mouth. So I was like, uh-oh. But by the time when I pulled the sheet back, I said, oh my God, this is malignant hyperthermia. One of the things I feared most and seen the least in my career, certainly short career at that point. So my resident asked if he should give a paralytic. And I said, no. He already has one trigger for malignant hyperthermia. Don't do that one. Wake him up. The treatment for malignant hyperthermia is dantrolene. And I asked the nurse that who had coordinated most of these trips for years, where's the dantrolene? And she covers her mouth, says, oh my God, I left it back in Cincinnati. And then I asked by this point, people started amassing in the room. So at this time, there's about 30 people in the operating room because they knew things were not going well. Because this kid was staying rigid for like 15 minutes, despite the anesthesia being off. So I asked the Belizean nurse, I was like, do you have dantrolene? He said, no, we haven't had it for like 3 months. I was like, okay, do you have any availability? I need to send off some lab work because we don't have labs. So I tried to get my M-House booklet out. Of course, a medical evac was out of the question. We didn't have labs. So nurse says, what do you want to do? I said, well, take a temperature every 5 minutes. If he, starts a temperature, we're packing him in ice and we're driving him in a church van an hour away. But ultimately what it came down to is saying this kid's going to die. And there's nothing I can do about it. So it's more like a carry, and it would, Jesus take the wheel. But I closed my eyes. I prayed to God, please don't take this boy. So realizing there was nothing I could do. I can't focus on myself and all my accolades and everything that I've done in the past. So I prayed. And ultimately, after 15 minutes, this kid woke up and became more normal tone. So I told Mom he didn't have surgery and he should never, ever have surgery in Belize, and that he should only have surgery in Mexico or the United States. And I went back to the hotel and went to my hotel room and just cried myself to sleep. One, because the kid almost died, and two, because God had it back to me. And I believe that was my God moment, knowing that God was there to take care of what I couldn't. So, as you can see, there's multiple pictures here because I was able to start a relationship with that family. And I work with Pastor Kirby, who's up in that middle picture, and Nurse Lupe, a Belizean nurse, to actually have this patient brought to the United States into the Shriners Hospital. So I was able to make arrangements, found a surgeon, found an anesthesiologist. We started the wheels rolling before we got a call from Gilberto's mom saying that Gilberto's dad refuses to let Gilberto come to the States for his surgery. So everything was shut down. Probably about 6 months later, when the October trip, the same group from Horizon went, Alejandra showed up for the screening day and had mentioned to a UC nurse anesthetist that I had worked with for a long time that they attempted to come for a surgery back in February, but it didn't go well and canceled. So he happened to call me from Belize on my cell phone, like a long, distance consult. And I certainly knew this kid. You don't forget this kid. And I said, do not do surgery. Do not move ahead with surgery. So they heeded the warning. The pastor asked me, well, why can't you just change your anesthetic technique for next time? Because there's just too many things that could go wrong, and I'm not going to do that again. So nonetheless, they didn't do surgery. And then when I went in February, I met this family again. And at this time, she was asking me to bring him to the States. And we had a long conversation about the commitment that it takes from both sides to do this. So again, we went back to Shriners, same deal. It was very long and drawn out. And that year, I happened to bring a senior resident who was going to do a pediatric fellowship and then essentially take over as a director at Shriners for anesthesiology. So I was explaining to her what happened to this kid, and the same thing that I just told you. I said the only thing that I've confused about was that without dantrolene, he still didn't, he didn't go into a crisis. So I don't know. So over the course of time, I researched other things that would cause a myotonic reaction to anesthesia and came upon a diagnosis of myotonic dystrophy, and then kind of researched that. And then you do an image search and you found very similar facial characteristics to what Gilberto had. So the minute I spoke out loud to this particular resident about maybe this is myotonic dystrophy and a reaction to anesthesia there. So didn't matter. It was just more a casual conversation, except for she told me that, well, in myotonic dystrophy, there's all kinds of other issues going on, potentially heart issues, lung issues. So it's even more dangerous than if this had been a straightforward malignant hyperthermia case, which Shriners had accepted him under. So when she happened to go back to Cincinnati and have a discussion with a senior anesthesiologist there, shortly after, I got an email from Shriners Hospital saying, after the administration have discussed this case, we don't think we can give him adequate care for what he needs. So door was closed. So I contacted Pastor Kirby. We talked on the phone. I told him exactly what the email said. And I said, I feel like we failed this kid. And he goes, Well, we just need to pray on it. So either a day later, 2 days later, or just by happenstance, apparently Pastor Kirby has a cousin or a best friend or of a cousin, some kind of relationship with that of the CFO or the CEO of Children's Hospital. At that point, they said, if you can get him here, we'll take care of everything else. So the red carpet was rolled out to bring this family over to the United States for his surgery. So he was here for a month, had his surgery. I spoke with the anesthesiologist, and they did all the tests on him. And they were able to do the surgery, and he was hospitalized for 4 days in one of the best children's hospitals in the nation. So that's pretty impressive in and of itself. So I got to spend time with Gilberto and his mom. It's the first time he's ever seen snow and probably the last in his life. So that was a very moving moment. But it was good to getting to know them over the course of a month. And every year when I go back, we continue to have a relationship with the family, gifts and whatnot. And she had actually come to Horizon and was met by a number of people who attended. And they've become kind of my Belizean family, such to the point where the Horizon Church, who changed over to Partners for Medical Relief, has kind of adopted him as well. He has a big issue of scoliosis, for which is probably more deadly than a cleft palate. But he can't certainly have something that big done in Belize because it requires a couple of months for a full spine. So they have been working out and will have his surgery hopefully soon. It was actually kind of delayed now because of COVID. And every year we bring this family to visit with the Belize participants. And this past February, they actually selected them to build them a home. Partners for Medical Relief, and that's down that right lower corner, because they were living with a family friend. Really they certainly don't have a lot of money, and their living situation was pretty poor to say the least. So I think that Partners for Medical Relief believed in me and the change that Gilberto had in my life, and wanted to kind of pay it forward back to them. So next slide. So my takeaways from year 2 were certainly a lot different than year 1. As I finally not only believed, but it was certainly that God moment that everybody was talking about. It was like a lightning strike. Trust in God, He is ultimately in control. I also learned certainly a large lesson in humility, and realized that this trip is not about me, never has been about me, but it's what God has done through me. And I don't typically put a whole lot of verse in any kind of presentations I've done, but from here forward I'll kind of relay some of the ones that have certainly been related to my life. And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose. So sometimes you don't know what the purpose is when you see that church pamphlet. Is this a sign? Is this a higher power recruiting me because He knows I needed to be there? Next slide. So Psalms, commit your way to the Lord, trust in Him, and He will act. So I certainly committed to this trip, and I took away more from this trip than I know I ever put into it. Continuing on, when I'm afraid, I put my trust in You, in God, whose word I praise, in God I trust. I shall not be afraid. What can flesh do to me? Or what flesh can do to me? So these were the exact sentiments where I kind of gave up, and I said, I trust in You to do what You're able to do, because it's certainly nothing I've able to accomplish on my own. So carrying on, trust in Him at all times, O people, pour out your heart before Him. God is a refuge for us. Okay, next slide. As I mentioned, humility is something, as somebody who's always been in a performance-based career. You want to be the best. You want to make yourself look like the best. But certainly it's very humbling to be in that situation. As Ephesians, for by grace you have been saved through faith, and this is not your own doing. It is the gift of God, not a result of works, so that no one may boast. And then carrying on with Matthew, whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and whoever humbles himself will be exalted. Next slide. So in terms of trusting in God and knowing that He has a plan for us all, Um, you have to just trust it. Sometimes he knows what's better for you. He'll provide, even though you think you're well prepared, and then end up not being prepared. And believing in God, you know that he will always be looking out for you. So in 2 Corinthians, and God is able to make all grace abound to you, so that having all sufficiency in all things at all times, you may abound in every good work. Followed with Acts. In all things I have shown you that by working hard in this way, we must help the weak and remember the words of Lord Jesus, how he himself said, it is more blessed to give than to receive. So during that first day before I even went to Belize with that group of people who've been there before, there was a common theme. They said, I felt that I was going there to work in God's name and do good things, but I ended up getting more out of taking care of those people than the care I was providing. So certainly have felt that I have received more than I've ever given on this trip. Next slide. Joshua 1, verse 9. Have I not commanded you, be strong and courageous? Do not be frightened and do not be dismayed, for the Lord God is with you wherever you go. So when I mentioned during that first year, I had a lot of anxiety, a lot of fears. And through teachings at Horizon, I think a lot of anxiety is because you think you're in control. That is actually at odds with the teaching of God. So once you realize that you are not in control, and that actually he is in control and his works are done through you, certainly the anxiety does come down. Lastly, Romans, likewise, the Spirit helps us in our weakness, for we do not know what to pray for as we ought, but the Spirit himself intercedes for us with groanings too deep for words. Next slide. So, like I said, I chose phases because I don't really know how many there'll be. I think I'm well on my way, but I have not arrived. So that's just sharing my story. Since going on this trip, I've certainly been very involved at all different levels with the Belize trip and planning for the trip, whether that's medications, supplies, recruiting residents who are, I guess, not only fit the service bill, but are ones who are most in need of God's intervention. So I don't go there to try to sell anything or necessarily teach anything. I let them kind of learn, and hopefully they'll catch a glimpse of a God's moment that may forever impact them as well. So as far as humility goes, or being humble, when I recruit for this, I bring other people in because it has moved me, and I really bring them along to just feel God's activity in their life without saying so. Because I've learned that God watches over us and provides in our times of need. Once I started believing that these were more than just words, it really kind of impacted my life moving forward. So I found that not only in the instance where I was in Belize, but just in my daily life, the power of prayer. I mean, there's been articles written, research done, but in addition to praying daily, both the Lord's Prayer from the Catholic side, and then kind of the more discussions with God. I do this daily, and in cases of very difficult, stressful cases, I certainly can be found saying at least several prayers, and certainly they're humble prayers. Just saying, work through me, please help me, guide me, give me the strength, give me the wisdom, but all in all, watch over and protect this patient. There's certainly things I could carry on about the Belizean resume, about the things that have come out of that trip. But like I said, it's about exposing people to the possibility of, hearing God's word and God's calling, more than it is about anything that is, developed on that trip. So from a point where I went through the motions early on in life, I just kind of, attending church because of the Catholic guilt, seeing my grandma. And at this point, I understand what she lived, because she lived her life in faith. So I finally reached my grandma's level of understanding. So next slide. I can certainly say the Lord's Prayer, but I could certainly, speak one prayer off the cuff. But when I came to think about it, I wanted to find one that actually captured what I was trying to get across. And that is, my Heavenly Father, praise you that faith does not come from the wisdom or understanding of humans, but through the power of your Spirit. As your servant Paul preached, his words were not his wisdom, but a demonstration of your power through him. Lord, I need your strength to speak wise words to others so that their faith will grow in you. Give me the words to share the work you have done in me with those who need hope. Like those hearing Paul, they will know faith in the Lord. And I am done. Thank you very much.